Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Temte. On the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today, we have Bill Benjamin joining us. Bill is a partner at the Institute for Health and Human Potential, and his work sits at the intersection of leadership, emotional well-being, and high performance. He's the creator of the Last 8% Framework, a science-based method that helps leaders face the difficult conversations and decisions that, let's be honest, most managers avoid. Most humans like to avoid that stuff. Bill, welcome to the show.
Great. Thank you very much. And just one small correction. I am a co-creator of the Last 8%. My business partner, JP, actually originally coined the idea, and then we've worked together to make it practical and applicable, but I want to give him the credit. JP Palou.
All right.
My business partner.
Well, very, very good. Bill, before we get started, please give our listeners the elevator pitch of your story.
Yeah, my story is I have degrees in mathematics and computer science, and I spent 14 years in the computer software industry. And what happened to me is what happens to a lot of, reasonably bright people who do well at their job. They get promoted, like they make you a manager. Right. But they don't give you any training or explain how to be a manager. And my models for coaches were my high school basketball coaches and what I saw of college football coaches on TV. So that you just ran around and yelled at everybody and told them what to do. So it turned out I wasn't a very good leader. People didn't really like working for me. And there was kind of time in my life when I was, fairly stressed. And I actually got exposed to this work that I now, teach and deliver. And it really made a difference for me. So I actually left my job in the computer software industry 24 years ago to do this work. So that's my quick story of how I got here.
Excellent. Well, apologies for busting in and laughing so loud, but my goodness, if I had $1 for every time that somebody told me that somebody tapped them on the shoulder, they were reasonably bright, and what happened? Well, they got asked to be a manager, and oh, by the way, they were given no training, no skill development to be a really good manager. Boy, I would be a very, very wealthy individual. So.
Yeah, and if you ask most people, do the qualities and characteristics that make somebody successful as an individual contributor necessarily mean they'll be a good leader? Most people would say no, and in fact, it was the opposite was true for me. What made me successful as an individual contributor really hampered my abilities as a leader.
Right. And that too is just an age-old story.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, if you had to pick one event in your life that just put rocket boosters behind your career, what would that be?
Well, it was that transition. I mean, I had a really good career going. I was vice president of a computer software company. And I made that choice to, go and found a business with my business partner. He'd actually started the company, but I was very small at the time, so to join him. And interestingly, part of the reason I left was because the president who I was reporting to at the time, I was really struggling with. I was really struggling with some of the decisions he was making. We say people don't leave company, people leave people. Well, I left him, and I should probably thank him because, had I stayed inspired, because I loved my job there. I don't know if I would have left if he hadn't been a bad leader. So in some ways, I have him to thank. But that was kind of the epochal moment for me, was making that choice. To leave a good career in the computer software industry.
Excellent. Well, 3 age-old stories that many of our listeners can relate to. So, Bill, let's start with the Institute for Health and Human Potential. Please give our listeners insight into what makes the Institute unique in the management and leadership development arena.
Yeah, we're a research and learning institute, and what really attracted me to it, because I was a client of IHHP before I, became an owner, is that there's very sort of research and brain science foundation to this thing that feels soft and squishy, which is leadership and culture and emotional intelligence. And as a guy with degrees in mathematics and computer science, I'm very logical. I'm very analytical. So I thought emotional intelligence was some icky, squishy thing. Empathy was for wimps. But now I've learned the research behind it, the brain science behind it. And so I think what we do really well is take that research and brain science, but then make it really practical, make it really applicable, help both individual leaders become better in their difficult moments, but also create entire cultures of an organization. We do both. We do individual leader development and then also culture shifting work.
Yeah. Yeah, well, growing up, I was one of those highly analytical leaders, came from a finance, computer science background. What was happening in the marketing department and certainly human resources and management had, I didn't want to have anything to do with that. Everything could boil down to the numbers and just get the work done. So yeah, empathy was all that soft, fuzzy, squishy stuff. And you're absolutely right. It is the most difficult, but the work that you're doing, I find very interesting because you're making these very important concepts accessible to those of us who are analytical, numbers based, who would normally shy away.
Yeah, and again, you asked, what makes us unique. I think that's one of the things we do really, really well is give it language, help people gain self-awareness in a way where they can be open to this, give actually people practical tools. So one of the examples of the language that just becomes living language with clients that we work with is the last 8%. And that's a term that we coined 7 or 8 years ago when JP, my business partner, he was working with 2 executives at a large company. They weren't getting along. Like that ever happens. And they were coached to have a conversation with each other about the impact they were having on each other. So they go in, they have the conversation, they come back, they're talking to their coaches, and the coaches ask, how did it go? And they both say, oh, went fine. Well, the coaches know better, so the coaches pushed a little bit and said, yeah, but did you say everything, we agreed you were going to say? And they both essentially said, yeah, you know what, actually, I got 85, 90, 95% of the way there. The other person started reacting, and I held back. I didn't really step in and say that last 5 or 10%. That is a very common experience that people have. So we took that idea and we did a study of 34,000 people and determined that on average, it's 7.56%, which we rounded up to 8. It's 8% that people feel they leave unsaid in a difficult conversation.
So that is your website states that organizational culture is built or broken in the last 8%. So explain a little bit more about the last 8% strategy that you bring to corporations.
Happy to. So in addition to kind of difficult conversations, the last 8% as we workshopped, and people said, well, it isn't just conversations. There's the difficult decisions we face. There's the easy ones where everyone's agreeing and everyone's going to be happy, or I know it's going to work out, but where there's a risk, where someone might have to be happy, where it's uncertainty. And we know that high performance requires risk-taking, but our brain is wired not to take risks. So it's tough conversations, tough decisions. It's even things like speaking up in a meeting or receiving critical feedback without getting defensive. There are many last 8% moments. And the reason they define someone's leadership and a culture is because of the cortisol effect. The cortisol effect is that when there's tension, pressure, conflict, uncertainty, cortisol gets released into our brains, which does a couple things. But one of the things it does is it causes memories to sear in. So people remember what you were doing in that difficult moment. They don't remember what you're doing in the 92% of the moments where everyone was getting along and everyone was happy and the deadlines were being met. They remember what you did in that tough moment. So that's what people remember. That's why you can do something right 9 times out of 10, but that one time that one time they forget, that's what they remember. So those last 8% moments, they define your reputation. That also then becomes what people model. So that becomes the culture. So these last 8% moments have an outsized influence on an individual's leadership, reputation, and a culture.
Yeah, I always wondered because I had hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals cycle through the organizations that I led, and I'd get somebody that would come up to me 5 years, 10 years after their tenure, and they would say something like, Andy, remember when you said this and it had such an impact on me. I'm so grateful for whatever that was. And I'm sitting there going, Awesome, great. I don't remember, but they certainly do. So leaders leave a big wake behind them, using a boating metaphor,
Absolutely.
and you never know how that wake is going to impact others. So you're letting us know that it's the tough moments. It's that last 8% that most people are going to remember. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. And we all in a last 8% moment. There's two kind of predictable default behaviors. One is the avoidance, right? You don't step in and say that tough part, or you make the easier decision. You don't make the tough decision. That's 68% of people in our research. Their common default behaviors to avoid. The other 32%, and I fall into this category sometimes, I'm in a difficult conversation. The other person's getting upset. Rather than stepping back, I step in, but I come on too strong, and now I'm making a mess of it. So we talk about people either being avoiders or make a messers.
Make a messers.
Avoiders or make a messers. And of course, it's situational, right? We're more complex than a simple binary choice like that. There might be certain situations, like if a senior leader is challenging you, where you kind of don't necessarily avoid. But I don't know about you guys, but with my teenage daughters, when they're yelling, I'm yelling back. I'm not avoiding that. I'm yelling back. So we can show up differently in different situations, but we all have kind of a common default behavior. And what we're teaching, this is a middle ground. So there's pushing through the discomfort and the anxiety we feel in a last 8% moment that we feel that our brain literally wants us to avoid, but stepping in, but doing it skillfully so we don't make a mess. So it's really teaching that middle ground, to be at our as best, not perfect, but at our best in our last 8% moments.
Yeah, so I think this is a great segue into a success story. So give us some color on the journey of what success looked like for a business or an individual that you're coaching. How replicable is this last 8% story for leaders who are listening right now and are interested in engaging with you?
I mean, honestly, that's what's so exciting about this work, is that we've been able to create what we call our last 8% culture system that takes those concepts and actually allows an organization to cascade it down through the organization. So a great example of a success story is Blue Cross of Idaho. They had what we would define as a family culture. And that's the other piece we have. And by the way, all of this is documented in our Harvard Business Review article called The Secret to Building High-Performing Teams, this idea of the last 8%, but then also our culture map, where we have, we identified two key pillars of a high-performing culture. One is connection. That's feeling valued. That's people having a voice. There's trust and high care. When people do values work, culture work, that's mostly what they think of, and it's absolutely critical, but it actually misses the second key pillar, which is high courage. The ability to do difficult things, name inconvenient truths, challenge the status quo, hold somebody accountable, make tough decisions, say no to someone. So a high-performing culture has both. And so we created a culture map, a 2x2 culture map. And if you think of a 2x2 where there's connection and courage on the two axes, if you think of a culture that's high in connection and care, but low in courage, that's a family culture. Right. It's a nice culture, but people are unwilling to do hard things. They don't want to upset people. There's lower standards of performance. Decision-making is slower because you got to make everyone happy. You got to include everyone. And there's nothing wrong with consensus decision-making, but taking too far, it slows things down. And people aren't having the tough conversations because they want to be liked. They don't want to be upset. They want to be caring. And so Blue Cross of Idaho, they would tell you it's blue nice, Idaho nice. They felt they were in a family culture. And in order to achieve their growth goals, their innovation goals, to actually improve retention, they felt they needed to move into a high-performing culture. They needed to add that courage element. And so we did a whole culture system with them. We start with an assessment. We work with a senior team. Then we cascade it down through the organization, having each leader in the organization conduct sprints. We call them sprints. Those are kind of in the flow of work, in their team meetings, discussing all this. And so it was a 6-month process. And we say we can change your culture in months, not years. We don't mean 2 months. We mean 6 or 8 months. Right. And they saw huge changes in their culture, both anecdotally, but also they saw their retention scores improve. The CEO said it probably saved them at least $10 million. We assessed pre and post. We actually saw big changes behaviorally. And so, we were really, really, thrilled with the impact that we were able to have. And obviously kudos to them. It requires a CEO, Paul Zerlo in this case, who believes in the value of people and culture, who's open to their own impact. Then a senior team that owns it, right? We talk about model and owning, because the senior team isn't modeling, forget trying to do culture change. And so, they were really, really an engaged client. And so it was a great project.
That's great. Well, thanks for taking us to the, my workplace feels like a family. To me, whenever I hear somebody say that, that's a gigantic red flag for the balancing act between trust and accountability that I like to talk about all the time, and your courage and connection framework. When you go in an engagement and they start talking about work as a family, do your ears perk up?
In fact, we do. We have companies proudly say we're a family, and we say you're not a family. You don't fire your lowest performing kid.
Right.
You may want to on some days, but you don't. And the encouragement we give them is that it's high care, high trust. Family is a great place to start. It's just not enough to be high performing. So we can build on that. Now, the opposite we see, and we do have some clients in this category, it's high courage but low connection. That's a transactional culture where results matter over relationships. That's a make a mess, blame environment. Toxic behaviors are tolerated. It's high anxiety, high burnout. It can achieve results over the short term, but it can't over the long term. There's a IT group and a government agency that will remain unnamed who kind of had this kind of culture. And so there, the shift is different. What we're trying to accomplish in a culture like that is different. And of course, the goal is to be both high courage and high connection, which is characterized by high care and high accountability. And both can exist. Sometimes clients think, oh, well, if we try to move from family to, high courage, we're going to lose that connection and care. And that's not true. Or the reverse. If we try to move from transactional, we're going to end up in a family. Everybody's going to be nice to each other. And that is absolutely not true. You can have both. You can have a culture where there's care, trust, and the tough conversations are happening. The tough decisions are being made. So both can exist together.
Thank you for that, Bill. We're going to take a really short commercial break. We'll be right back with Bill Benjamin. Hey, Andy Temte here with the Remainders. Looking for great Christmas gift ideas? Pick up a copy of our new album, Feel Something New, at Deaf Ear Records in downtown La Crosse today. And we're back with Bill Benjamin talking about the world of organizational culture and leadership development. Bill, let's turn our attention to emotional intelligence. We're living through a moment right now, a little more than a moment, where the importance of emotional intelligence is being discounted and legacy more directive, and as we talked about before the break, often toxic management practices are seeing a resurgence. What does the science and the data say about the benefits of continuing to invest in building emotional intelligence in leaders and teams?
Yeah, and by the way, ignore emotional intelligence at your peril, because the research is really clear. And it was originally documented in Dan Goleman's book back in 1996. It was the Harvard study, the seminal research study on emotional intelligence, where they took medical, business, and law school graduates, measured them in their IQ, their technical skills and job knowledge, and what came to be known as their emotional intelligence, then followed them in a 40-year longitudinal study. And they measured their success, and they looked at success pretty broadly. They did look at career and wealth accumulation. They also looked at personal and psychological factors, divorce rates, alcoholism. As a predictor of success, IQ was very poor. In fact, the only correlation between IQ and success in that study was that at high IQ ranges, it was a reverse predictor. And everyone knows that person. They're so smart and they're always right. And if they have to be right, you have to be wrong, and nobody wants to follow somebody. You have to be wrong all the time. What I found interesting about the study was technical skills and job knowledge. These were doctors, businessmen and women, lawyers, was actually also a poor predictor of success. Not because they didn't matter, but because they're called threshold competencies. You need a certain amount of IQ and technical skills to do any job. Once you get over the threshold, though, getting more doesn't significantly differentiate performance. I've spoken to surgeons before. Do you want your surgeon high in IQ and technical skills? Of course you do. But in the case of surgeons, they're all already over the threshold. I shared a study
Right.
with them that showed that surgeons who are high in impulse control and empathy to emotional intelligence competencies, those surgeons get sued less often.
Mm.
Makes sense, right? You bet they
Yep.
paid attention after that. So
Right.
in the study, emotional intelligence counted for twice as much as IQ skills and technical skills combined in terms of determining who would be successful. And if we bring it back to our work, this idea of last 8% moments mattering, in a last 8% moment when there's tension and pressure and conflict, it's emotions that get triggered. It's emotions that cause us to go to those avoid or make a mess behaviors that we know aren't skillful. So even if you don't care about the Harvard study, just know in your life, at home and at work, right? Showing up and being skillful in your last 8% moments is critical. And that's all about managing emotions. The good news is it's not a bunch of soft and squishy stuff. There's actually brain science to what happens, when we get triggered emotionally. So we can, start to recognize that and then learn tools and skills to show it more effectively. But that is the critical factor. That's what underlies, building a high-performing culture, being effective in your last 8% moments. It's emotional intelligence, managing emotions.
Awesome. So let's have a mentorship moment. You've got a hypothetical mid-level leader sitting right in front of you right now who's done some work to understand themselves and those around them when it was in style, but they just kind of half-assed it, putting it mildly. Now progress is slowed by the allure of the return to directive my way or the highway management styles. What's your coaching advice for this individual?
Well, emotional intelligence and great leadership starts with self-awareness. So my first questions would be to ask them, where do they see their strengths? Where's their opportunities for development? Where are they struggling? Where might they be having a positive impact on people, having a negative impact on people? And if they're not really seemingly to identify those things, then I might encourage them to do a 360. We have an emotional intelligence 360 because, when you get anonymous feedback, you might find out some blind spots. By the way, you might find out you're doing a lot better than you think you are. So many people, when they do their 360s, like they're so hard on themselves that they actually score better. But a lot of people also identify. So that self-awareness, recognizing your strengths and recognizing, some of the things that may be derailing you is absolutely important. So that's where the coaching starts. Is in what are those areas, that you could improve, particularly in last 8% moments.
Yeah. How do you help? So let's suppose you've got this individual and you're working with them on the last 8%. Where does that really start? What does that process look like? Peel back the onion just a little bit.
It starts with identifying what are those last 8% moments that you're not always your best in, that you might be avoiding or making a mess of. So it could be challenging your boss. It could be holding your team accountable. It could be, making those decisions. You go into a meeting and there's no way you're doing it. You walk out and you're doing it. That whole saying no, or making decisions where somebody might be unhappy. I used to kind of let who was ever going to scream the loudest influence my decision because I didn't want to deal with them. So it's recognizing where those avoid or make a mess behaviors are, affecting your abilities in your last 8% moments, and then really digging into, well, why? Why am I not? For me, I got promoted from amongst a group of friends who and suddenly I'm having to make decisions and give feedback that they don't like. So a big part of it was wanting to be liked.
Yeah.
I don't want them, and they weren't going to like me in that moment. And so that, as Steve Jobs said, if you want to be liked all the time, don't be a leader, sell ice cream. So as a leader, so there's many reasons why we might be avoiding or we're making a mess because we're getting frustrated and we're not feeling listened and we don't feel. So it's all that understanding, why we're behaving the way we are in those last 8% moments. And then learning some tools and skills, right? So you're in that moment, that idiot says that thing, you get that email, you're frustrated. You're going to go type, reply to all and add 3 people, which you probably shouldn't do. So how do you manage that, desire to, that fight or flight, emotional response, avoid, make a mess, how do you manage that? So again, it starts with that self-awareness and then progress to, what are some tools and skills?
Yeah,
making news.
in the background. My mind is going subconscious bias, and bringing some of those into working memory for the individual and
Oh,
saying this stuff
absolutely.
actually exists.
We make most of our jump to judgment decisions on less than 5% of available information. And
Yep.
we, as you say, have unconscious, we assume the worst. Oh, that person doesn't like us. They're not responding because they don't agree. We're making all these assumptions that are often, inaccurate. And again, it's like that part of our system, it's our limbic system that's there to protect us if we're in a jungle. So we need to react quickly with little information. Trying to be a leader or a dad or a spouse or partner, that wiring doesn't work very well for us. You're absolutely right. You got to kind of stop, try to bring some awareness to some of those, some of those unconscious biases, and just even, recognizing, is the reaction I'm about to have going to serve me? Am I avoiding something that, I'm going to feel regret about later? Because we talk about, like, a lot of people when they avoid, they know they're avoiding. The last 8% is almost the gap between the risk we know we should take and the risk we are taking. And when we don't take that risk, we can feel some shame and regret. So you're trading that short-term discomfort and anxiety for long-term shame and regret. And so it's really about learning, recognizing those moments and stepping in and stepping in skillfully.
Yeah. So, Bill, what have we not discussed that you want to make sure that listeners take away? And in your answer, please lean into your science-based approach to leadership development. Maybe toss in a statistic or two that all leaders should know, but probably don't.
Yeah. I think two things. One, if you are a leader of a team, and as I was describing that quadrant, transactional versus family versus, last 8%, by the way, the bottom quadrant, the lower left, is low courage and low connection. That's a fear-based culture. Most of your listeners are self-selected as aggressive learners. They're probably not fear-based. But you can actually get a copy of that culture map. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and a little exercise that you can do with your team. So I would actually encourage people to sit down with their team and say, and by the way, you can read the Harvard Business Review article to really understand it, and actually sit down with your team and say, okay, team, where are we on the culture map? What are we doing well? What does good to great look like for us? How can we do better? So one is the culture piece as a team, and then the second, individually. The main tool we teach for people to manage themselves in their difficult moments is the SOS strategy. And the SOS, it's very simple. It's just hard to remember to do. It's just stop is the first S, disconnect from the trigger. If you're alone, change your body posture, save that email in the draft folder, don't send it, get up, go for a walk. By the way, I've done that many times. Never once have I come back to that email I wrote in a triggered state and thought, yeah, that's the email I should send. That's me at my best, right?
Never.
If you're with people, you can take a drink of water. Your palms will start to curl, not into a full fist, but you can open your palms. You can lean back if you're feeling in make a mess mode. You can lean forward if you're feeling you're in void mode. There's actually a lot of little things you can do to kind of create that stop, that pattern interrupt. The O is oxygenate. That's your deep conscious breath. The intake of a large amount of oxygen actually has a physiological effect of minimizing the chemicals, the adrenaline, the cortisol that the amygdala that the emotional system has released. So you start to calm down. And then the final S in SOS is seek information. Do I have an unconscious bias? Am I amplifying the negative? Is what I'm about to do going to serve me? Should I really hit reply to all? Or should I stop and, get on a Teams call or whatever, Zoom call with someone? So seek information. And then, by the way, seek information can also be what might be going on for that person. We haven't talked much about empathy because you have to start with yourself.
Right.
But once you're calm and you're not triggered and you're not feeling a need to be right and judgmental and certain, and you're more kind of calm and open, then you can start thinking about, well, what's going on for that other person? What are they struggling with? Why might they be triggered? And actually, show some empathy and connect with that person. Which when you do then step in to give them feedback or hold them accountable or make a tough decision, they're so much more likely to accept, your decision or your feedback because you connected with them first. So that seek information part of SOS is also about, toward the end, connecting and having empathy.
That's great. Well, Bill, thanks so much. Before we get to our lightning round, other than LinkedIn, where can folks get a hold of you?
Yeah, IHHP.com, Institute for Health and Human Potential. You can read both about our culture work and also our emotional intelligence training. We have the two solution lines. And then LinkedIn are the two best places. Bill Benjamin on LinkedIn are the two best places to find me.
Excellent. So 3 quick lightning round questions.
Great.
All right. So, Bill Benjamin, you've just won a $100 million lotto jackpot, but there's a stipulation that half of your net winnings go to one philanthropic organization or cause. Who do you pick as the recipient?
I've lived in downtown Toronto, downtown New York, and downtown Chicago, and homelessness is something I have a real passion for. Many of those folks, are veterans, have mental health issues. So I would give to an organization that, kind of spans all of that, all of the things that go into trying to deal with, what seems to be an intractable problem. So that's something I'm very passionate about.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Second question. You have access to a really small time machine and you can send a message to an earlier version of Bill Benjamin. What's the message and what previous version of yourself do you send it to?
Yeah. I mean, probably in my late 20s when I was kind of, getting promoted and doing well, I kind of was a bit full of myself, little on the arrogant side. I would just say, don't take yourself too seriously, right? Because also, then when things didn't go well or got negative feedback, it really affected me, right? Like I reacted way more strongly so I would just go back and coach myself not to take myself so seriously in my late 20s.
Yeah, well, at least you're going back to your late 20s where your frontal area is actually able to accept the advice.
My prefrontal lobe, yes, is fully formed and can accept and hear feedback, yes.
Yeah. a lot of guests, myself included, I would go back to like my 14, 15-year-old self and I wouldn't listen to anything back then. Bill, we're all works in progress. What are you focused on right now in your personal journey of growth?
Really trying to validate the other person when I'm frustrated by them. I'm pretty good at it when I'm calm and I empathize and validate, and they're talking about something else. But when they've impacted me, and again, this isn't about me just accepting things. So I'm still going to give feedback, set a boundary, hold them accountable. But before I do that, if I can understand where they're coming from, I can validate them. They're so much more likely than to hear my feedback. It's just a really hard thing to do when you're triggered. Just a really hard thing to do because you're a little more reactive and judgmental and you're feeling the victim. And so that's my work that I'm working on in all my relationships with my girlfriend, my teenage daughters, and my coworkers.
Yeah. Awareness is so simple on the surface, but so complicated when you dive in. Bill, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you today. Thank you so much for your contributions to the show.
Oh, it's been great to be on. Love talking to you. It's been great.
All right. My name is Andy Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major streaming services as well as out on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share this public good with your friends, your family, your neighbor, and maybe the colleague, the genius jerk down the hall that needs to hear this. The show is produced by Nick Temte. We'll see you next time on the Balancing Act.